Hey class, so let's talk about the beginning of the Second World War. So this week we're going to look at how does Nazi Germany become more internationally aggressive as the 1930s go on? How do they become more aggressive towards the neighboring countries of Europe? Why did the Allies, Britain and France, choose the strategy of appeasement to deal with Hitler's aggression? Appeasement means basically giving someone what they want to avoid future conflict with them later. And why did the Allies choose this approach instead of standing up to Hitler more strongly in the 1930s? And ultimately, could the Second World War have been prevented? At least, once Hitler gets into power, is there any kind of, counterfactual history? Is there any way that we could have avoided a war? Or was Hitler getting in power kind of bound to end with another European war? So think about these things throughout the week. Okay, quickly, couple things. So appeasing Hitler, what happened in the 1930s? So Hitler, once he gets in power, wants to expand German territory, expand their borders. He has two main reasons for this. First of all, he wants to unite all German-speaking people. So there's German-speaking people in Austria, in parts of Czechoslovakia, and Hitler believes all German people should be united in one nation. And he talked a lot about this concept of Lebensraum, or living space for the German people. He talked about this even in Mein Kampf, his book. He talked about how the German people needed more land to live on. And he looked at neighboring countries like Poland as countries that should basically give up some of their land so that the German people had more living room. This idea of Lebensraum really was a big part of Hitler's motivations. Britain allowed some appeasing of Hitler, partly because there was a sense that maybe the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh. Germany has just been getting back on track, and maybe it's fair that they are being more aggressive now. So there's a sense of kind of guilt or sympathy for Germany in Britain because of the Treaty of Versailles, and that played a role in the British leaders taking kind of a soft stance and appeasing Hitler. Hitler, once he gained power, began rearming the country. He began openly defying the Treaty of Versailles, rebuilding the German military, building up its air force, its tanks, its navy. So Hitler, pretty early on when he gets in power, is openly defying the Treaty of Versailles, but yet the Allies choose an approach of appeasement. He also began to expand German territory at the same time, first sending an army to the Rhineland. Remember that area that was supposed to be demilitarized according to the Treaty of Versailles. And Hitler also united Germany with Austria. He basically marched German troops into Austria, which is also a German-speaking country, and unified those two countries, Austria and Germany. So all of these things went against Treaty of Versailles, yet the Allies, who had their own problems and certainly wanted to avoid another war, did not react aggressively. They took a soft stance on Hitler and thought, maybe if we let the Germans do these things, then they'll be satisfied and we won't have to have another war. Next, Hitler sets his eyes on, after Austria, Hitler sets his eyes on an area called the Sudetenland, which is in Czechoslovakia. It's sort of the northwestern area of Czechoslovakia, where there are a lot of German-speaking people. So Hitler looked around and said, every place that has German-speaking people should be part of our country. So Hitler next looks at the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia. You can see it's this area here, this part of Czechoslovakia, that Hitler in 1938 wanted to carve off and make part of Germany. So the Allies were scared of Hitler's aggression, and they wanted at the same time to avoid another war. So what happened was the Allies sent their leaders, this is Neville Chamberlain of Britain, along with the leaders of France, Germany, and Italy here, to Munich in 1938 to basically meet with Hitler and say, what's going on? try to kind of solve this crisis that was emerging as Germany became more aggressive. And the Munich Agreement from the Munich Conference becomes really a symbol of the whole policy of appeasement. Because in this agreement, the leaders of Britain and France basically agree with Hitler that, okay, Hitler, you can have the Sudetenland, but no more demands for land, right? So they say, you can have this piece of Czechoslovakia, we won't do anything, but that's it. That's all you get. And then you have to chill out, stop invading other countries. Hitler says, yeah, sure, of course, just let me have this little piece of Czechoslovakia. And he very quickly breaks those promises. But important to understand, just going back, that at the time, Chamberlain in Britain, the leader of Britain who was there at Munich, was not unpopular. He was seen as the man who, quote, had made peace for our time. So within the British public, there was a lot of support for this policy of appeasement. Some British political leaders, like Winston Churchill, said, this is dumb, we can't trust Hitler, he's a snake, he's just going to break his word as soon as it's convenient for him. But important to understand that this is one of those examples of looking back at history, it's kind of obvious, but at the time, British and French people were in a different sort of headspace. They were certainly still scarred by the First World War and wanted to avoid another war with Germany. But in hindsight, this was appeasement, didn't work out at all. Hitler almost immediately began doing the things he said he wouldn't do. March 15th, 1939, the Nazis occupy the rest of Czechoslovakia, not content with the Sudetenland. Here's a photo of Nazi soldiers marching into Prague, the Czech capital, in March of 1939. September 1939, the Nazis then invade Poland, which, if we go back to the map, is here between Germany and the USSR over here. Germany and the USSR actually make a secret agreement that they will not fight over Poland, rather they're going to divide it up down the middle. That's called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement between Germany and the USSR. So Germany says, okay, USSR isn't going to bother us. Next step we're going to do is carve off this country of Poland to add it to our territory, to our living space. And finally, the invasion of Poland makes the Allies, Britain and France, say, okay, that's it. We can't stand for this. We have to declare war on Germany. So it's really the invasion of Poland that triggers the Second World War and makes the Allies finally give up on this idea of appeasement, this idea that somehow if we just let Hitler have some of what he wants, he will be satisfied and will have peace. The invasion of Poland finally makes the Allies give up on that idea. The Germany then proceeds to, as you see on this map, continue expanding and occupying huge parts of Europe. I mean, the German expansion with their newly built up military and their tactic of blitzkrieg, which you'll read a little bit about this week, they're able to just continue expanding through invasions and alliances around Europe. In fact, maybe most significantly, 1940, Germany invades France in May of 1940 and actually achieves a very rapid victory over France, who was seen as, the other main power of Europe. Germany takes over France in 1940, and basically through either occupation or alliances, by 1940, Germany controls almost all of continental Europe. Spain is another fascist country, along with Italy, that's allied with Germany, and so the Germans basically have control of the continent. They launch a campaign of bombing on Britain, but they never actually conquer Britain, nor do they ever conquer the USSR, although Hitler does break the promise and invade USSR in 1941 with Operation Barbarossa. But you can see the Germans do not stop expanding. They actually continue expanding and just smashing anyone who stands up to them in Europe with their very powerful built-up military. So appeasement obviously seems dumb in hindsight, right? It's one of those things, it's like, oh, like how could you have missed that? And there were people at the time who said, Chamberlain, you're really messing up. This is just bad news. You can't trust Hitler. He's just lying to your face to get what he wants. But there are other perspectives on this. So different perspectives on this policy of appeasement, not achievement. So One school of thought is Chamberlain's appeasement policy made war more likely because Hitler thought he could get away with anything, right? The old "if you give a mouse a cookie" idea. Hitler saw that the Allies did not want to fight, and he then was more bold to take more actions throughout the rest of Europe. So, on one hand, you could argue that maybe if the Allies had took a stronger stance sooner, Hitler would not have been so emboldened. On the other hand, others argue Chamberlain's appeasement policy brought a valuable year for Britain to get ready for war, which was bound to come. So Chamberlain was buying time, allowing the British more time to get ready to fight Germany. Did Chamberlain believe Hitler was a man of his word? Did he genuinely trust Hitler? Or was this kind of just a strategic decision to buy time? Certainly, if you actually had, if the British had gone back and read Mein Kampf, Hitler's whole rambling book that he wrote in the 20s, they actually would have seen he had very specific plans, including the invasion of Poland, that he was carrying out in real life once he got in power. And then, of course, the Czech people who were not represented at all at the Munich conference, the decision to Sudetenland also could be, the Munich Agreement also could be criticized because it really let down the Czech people and showed that the Allies were not going to defend their independence from the Nazis. So there's a variety of perspectives, right? It's the appeasement. In hindsight, it seems like, oh, obviously, Hitler was a liar who was just going to say whatever he needed to get what he wanted. But at the time, understand this, the Allies' choices, there were really no good choices. I mean, people didn't want to fight another war. And there was a lot of people who were supportive of appeasement. They wanted their leaders to keep them out of a war so they didn't have to fight and die and have everything go to hell again. Ultimately, the Allies were more worried about communism than fascism. That's another thing to consider, right? They're really more worried about the USSR, which is a communist dictatorship at this time, than fascism. So there was a bit more sympathy towards the Germans because, hey, they're not communists, they're not the Russians. They at least are, more in line with what we want from other countries. Again, there's sympathy because of the Treaty of Versailles. This is also in the middle of an economic depression, so the idea that we're going to spend a bunch of money on a war when people are unemployed and struggling to find, enough ways to put food on the table, that's not a popular idea, spending a bunch on the military when people are struggling like that. And there is also, again, this memory of the First World War and how terrible it was that made people in the Allied countries really reluctant to get involved in something like that again. I mean, keep in mind at this time, World War I is only like 15 years ago, right? So it's very fresh in the minds of people. So that's appeasement. It didn't work, but we can think this week about, was it the right choice at the time? Could this war have been prevented at all? And this is really how the war breaks out, the Second World War, which, as you can see, as we look at this history, you can see why many historians consider this more or less kind of just a continuation of the First World War. There's a lot of kind of continuing threads that are just picked up again in this war.